Once again, welcome to Insights with Dr. Val-Addo. My name is Dr. J. Val-Addo, a theologian public. Presently, Insights with Dr. Val-Addo is focusing on the past 500 years of African history on slavery. This presentation is a continuation of the dual question that we put forth in our previous presentation. How did Africans become slaves of Europeans? And did Africans sell African Americans into slavery of Europeans? Part 2. Now we will try to answer this dual question in two ways. One, we will answer them from authentic or true historical accounts. And two, from the understanding of the culture and the practices of the Gold Coast and the hinterland as described in English. So let's continue from the authentic or true historical accounts. We've already covered 5 authentic facts, which are also the strategies the Europeans used to enslave people. So we will continue with the next 5, making 10. Now let's continue with the authentic historical fact number 6, which was a strategy number 6 the Europeans used, was a continuous corruption of a middleman, or the use of a middleman. Just as Europeans corrupted some African kings or chiefs, they continued looking for some individual influential people and corrupted them in the Gold Coast as middlemen to look for and sell fellow Gold Coasters as slaves. This particular one happened in the Gold Coast from 1725. There was a man by name Kojo Ejim. He was also known as Brempong Kojo. Brempong in the Gold Coast language means the outstanding one among equals, or the noble one, or in modern Ghanaian parlance, he will be known, or he will be called Kojo One, or Ejil Kojo. That means there is no one beside him. Now this is how this man felt about himself, because he traded with the Europeans. They influenced him and they used him as a middleman. And we want to take some excerpts from Dr. I.S. Efson, a prominent British trained barrister at law and a social anthropologist. He studies human beings. Apart from practicing law, he studied human beings and their social upbringing and growth. He was from the Gold Coast and practiced law in Ghana after graduating with the doctorate in philosophy of PhD in law. He refers to Kojo Ejim as a wealthy African trader who also became a kabosia, that is a magistrate. He wasn't actually a magistrate, he was a lay person, but from every indication, he was an outspoken pocket lawyer, and so they appointed him to be a magistrate, a lay magistrate. Now, Kojo Ejim sold an 8-year-old Gold Coast boy in 1725 to Captain Arnold Stinghart, the master of a Holland slave ship. There was a slave ship that came from Holland, and this man was the captain, and he sold an 8-year boy to him. The Gold Coast boy was renamed Jacob Eliza Johannes Captain. This man, Kojo Ejim, or Brimpong Kojo, was compensated by the British by sending his son, Philip Kweku, to Britain to train as a reverend minister of the Church of England and to become a school teacher or an educator. He returned to the Gold Coast to work for them. And I want to point out the contradiction. A slave collaborator, a slave trader, a slave enabler from the Gold Coast, whom the British took his son to go to Britain to train him as a reverend minister and a school teacher or educationist to do their bidding for these slave masters. What a contradiction. And I've been looking at the contradiction with slavery and other things the Europeans did. Now, the other thing the Europeans did was to practice slavery alongside representative democracy in the US. The very year they had the 20 African slaves, that was the same year in 1619 when they started representative democracy. How can this kind of democracy still hold on to slaves? And we will address these contradictions in the future if we have the opportunity. How can Europeans practice their kind of Christianity and educate some Africans while still practicing slavery? These are real issues that we should think of that will help us to understand how Europeans and others from their lineage have been able to capture Africans and use them as the way they want to use them. Now, the other one is the authentic fact or strategy number 7 was seizure. Now, Europeans seized African children or the Gold Coast children with force and sold them into slavery. And this happened in Gold Coast in 1751. According to Dr. Efson, a Gold Coast boy by name Atobra Kweku Enu, and I want to quote Dr. Efson, quote, was seized together with 20 other children of both sexes by European pirates who brandished their pistols and sabers, threatened to kill them if they attempted to escape. Close quote. They confined them, put them in chains, gave them whips, and these children cried. But they carried them away to Grenada in the West Indies and sold them into slavery. Now, they came with their pistols. These were described as European pirates. These children were playing on the coast, on the seashore. And these pirates, European pirates, came with pistols and sabers. Sabers are single cutting-edge sword. So they came with a single cutting-edge sword, well sharpened with pistols. And they captured these children, and they were in all about 21 of them, and they threatened to kill them if they attempted to escape. They confined them, put them into chains, gave them whips. These children were crying, but they never have empathy nor sympathy, and they carried them away from their parents and sold them into slavery. How much were they sold as slaves per each person? Now, according to Professor Edubuahene, from 1660 to 1690, a slave was sold at £3 and £4. In the 1700s, a slave was sold at £10. In 1730, a slave was sold at £18. So it was gaining value. Selling of slaves were gaining value. In the 1800s, that is in the first half of the 19th century, that is 1800s to 1850, a slave was then sold at 27 pounds. So from 3 pounds in 1660 to 27 pounds in 1800s to 1850. They were making a lot of money. And so this is how they seized people and sold them into slavery. Now, authentic fact or strategy number 8, the Europeans used. They used their European kind of Christianity and European philosophy to promote slavery. Now, the Christianity of the Europeans lacked biblical interpretation. They used the curse Noah imposed upon Canaan to teach that Africans were cursed. And so they said Canaan wasn't cursed, but it was Ham. And that was not true. And so they say Ham, the Africans were descendants of Ham. And that is not true. In actual fact, Africans, dark Africans are the descendants of Shem. And so what Noah said has no link with Africans. And Shem wasn't cursed. And Noah was not God to curse Canaan and to curse Ham. And so they misinterpreted, misused, and misapplied the scriptures to promote slavery. They also used their kind of particular wisdom, the wisdom that was considered by them as philosophical in Europe, Western Europe. And all what their philosophers said was to belittle the Negro, the dark African, and because of what they said, they took a lot of Africans into slavery. Time is not on my side to quote their philosophers, but we have done that in the previous presentations. And if you listen to their philosophers, their way of thinking, and what they said about Negroes, dark Africans, you will agree with me that all the derogatory statements by their philosophers, their explorers, were the statements that influence slavery, racism, and segregation. Now let's go to authentic fact number 9, which was the strategy they used. And it was a corruption of more influential citizens as middlemen. Now, Europeans corrupted more influential citizens of the Gold Coast as middlemen with hired workers as kidnappers to escalate slavery, or to look for people and sell them secretly as slaves. And I want to quote Balfour. Balfour writes, in those days, the slavers and their local agents could catch people at least chance and at any place and at any time. People became afraid to go to farm or to hunt for game, since no one knew when the slavers could pounce on them. The inhuman trade destroyed the ability in the people to plan and initiate programs of life. The survivors were thrown into a state of indecision and hopelessness as to what tomorrow held for them. All aspects of life were destroyed by the slave trade. Close quote. So this is influencing other few middlemen who also hired people to capture people who were going to farm and doing their own everyday business or trade, and took them into slavery. Authentic fact or strategy number 10 they used was to butter guns and gunpowder or ammunitions that promoted intra-tribal wars. Now, the Europeans battered their things like guns and gunpowder and other things like textiles and bracelets, brass vessels, daggers, knives, swords, javelins, matchlock, and firelock muskets, tobacco pipes for smoking, schnapps, wine, gin, mirrors, and glass beads, and batter them with the gold, the ivory, the gold dust, the grains they could get. And as they did this, they came out with ammunitions. They came with guns and gunpowder and taught them how they could use it. And when they were able to exchange more guns and gunpowder or more ammunitions to tribes and taught them how to use it to shoot, then they promoted what we call inside tribal wars. People of a tribe will fight and they will promote. Now they were not using middlemen, but they will teach people to use the guns and fight with people and capture them and give them to them as slaves. So this was another strategy of these Europeans. They actually planned very well. They planned well and they did everything. It was very strategic. They took time to plan and they executed this, and all these 10 strategies, which are authentic historical facts, were the means through which they could get slaves, more slaves from the Gold Coast or the Guinea Coast. Now, and so with this, we will argue convincingly that what the professor of history said, that slavery was indigenous in Africa and the Europeans just took advantage of it and traded with Africans to get more slaves, is wrong. And so there are many things that I could have expounded on, but I do not want to bore you. But I want to argue a little bit on the claims by two groups of African Americans that I mentioned in my previous presentation, that Africans sold African Americans into slavery. Now, from authentic fact or strategy number 5, we realize that Europeans corrupted some African rulers or chiefs to get slaves. Authentic fact strategy number 6, there was a continuous corruption of a middleman in the Gold Coast. Then authentic fact or strategy number 9, they corrupted more influential citizens as middlemen. And so with this, we cannot say Africans as a people sold them. It's a weak argument to generalize. Only few people were enlisted by these Europeans. And that does not mean all Africans. They were corrupted. In fact, Europeans who wrote history used the word Europeans, their own people corrupted African rulers. Some of them, not all of them, they corrupted these middlemen. And so we cannot say Africans sold African Americans into slavery. It's going to be a generalization for the action of a few people, and in logic and reasoning, to generalize for the action of a few people or an individual is a wrong way of thinking, and that generalization is unacceptable and it's against the rules and laws of reasoning and logic. Now, in our next presentation, we will further consider the claims of the professor of history and the two African Americans. I think we've done so much to explain the fact, but we will leave no stone unturned, and we will explain what actually was going on in the culture and the practices of the Gold Coast and the hinterlands, which were described in English. So we will look at the understanding of the culture and the practices of the Gold Coast and the hinterlands described in English words. And that will help us to understand the fact that slavery was not indigenous. It was not practiced in Africa or the west coast of Africa before the Europeans came. And that there is no iota of truth that Africans in general sold African Americans into slavery. Rather, Europeans influenced a few they could influence, and they used them as their agents. And so being agents, we cannot generalize and say Africans sold African Americans. Of course, we concede that some Africans who were influenced by Europeans as agents helped them to get slaves. But that was not the only strategy. They advanced their strategy with time. And we believe that we've been very fair, and we want African Americans to look at Africans as their brothers and sisters and not, develop some negative sentiments towards them. And that is unhealthy. And so as we bring this presentation to the end, if you receive this presentation on the WhatsApp, please do us a favor, go to the YouTube and type in Insights with Dr. Val-Addo. You will find all our presentation, including this one there. And while you are there, please press the subscribe button to receive Insights with Dr. Val-Addo and the notification bell to receive an alert when a new presentation is released. Give us a thumb up if this presentation has been an eye-opener and bless you intellectually. And click the share symbol to send to friends and relatives and others. And please scroll down to the comment section and leave us a comment or a question, and we will be glad to attend to them. We will read them, and if it's a question, we will answer them for you. God bless you, and thank you for your time.